Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to our first IFA Clinic. My name's Hazel Courtney. I'm president of the International Federation of Airworthiness, or IFA, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone to our first clinic event. The purpose of these events is not so much to give you a presentation, but rather to get a live expert on board to answer your questions that are particularly pertinent to what you're doing at the moment. So just before we get started, I'd like to hand over to the IFA CEO, John Vincent, just to say a few words about what IFA is and what we do.
Thanks very much, Hazel. I'm John Vincent and CEO of IFA. Now, IFA is the International Federation of Airworthiness. It's a non-governmental organization. It's also a UK charity. The Federation has been around since the 1970s, so it has quite a long history. We're a group of people who are passionate about aircraft airworthiness, and that extends across both initial airworthiness, that's design, certification, and manufacture, and continuing airworthiness, maintenance, repair, and overhaul, and the vital role played by aviation professionals, engineering staff. It's the generosity of our members and supporters and contributors that enable us to keep active. By joining us, you can help promote the important role that's played by our profession. Day to day, the best way to get in contact with us is through our website, which is ifairworthy.com. We try to keep that up to date and refreshed. So please join us. We need new members. We welcome new members. We are a membership-driven organization. So as a member, you can play a vital role in keeping the organization going. So keep in touch, join us, and I'll now hand back to Hazel, who will introduce our speaker for the day. Thank you.
Hi. Thanks, John. And just to mention, for people who are members, we have a position paper on the industry and issues in the industry going to be posted soon on the IFA website, which will be in the members area. So do check in and have a look at that. So just to remind anyone who's just joining, this is being recorded, just to make people aware. So let's get started. So I'm delighted to introduce Simon Roberts, who I've known for I don't know how many years. Probably the top expert in the area on safety management systems. He's come from an airworthiness background. He was an airworthiness inspector at UK CAA and then a regional manager. And since then, he's become a consultant in safety management systems, both for UK CAA and many other organisations. So, Simon, welcome today.
Thank you.
Let's get started by just asking you to maybe just briefly summarise where you think we are with implementing SMS in the aircraft maintenance world, and then I have some questions for you that people have sent in, particularly for their organisations. Where do you think we are at the moment?
Okay, thanks, Hazel. And it's interesting when you look back. But when I started doing SMS for the CAA in 2009, we were at that point encouraging maintenance organisations to implement SMS. And certainly those closely connected to operators were obviously implementing SMS on the back of the operators' requirements. And then many of the maintenance organizations recognizing that there's some added value if you can implement an SMS even ahead of the regulations. So many organizations were already starting to implement SMS. And it's taken a few years before the regulators have finally mandated it, and now it's it's pushing everybody into saying, okay, now we need to have something that not only has been working for us but actually meets the regulations. And I think for those that were already implementing SMS, probably all they've got to do is make sure it fits the regulations, I think. But there's a lot of organizations who probably just been leaving it until the regulation is issued before they then say, okay, now what do we do? And I think we're in that situation where it's those organizations that are saying, well, how do I do this? Especially on this, I guess the component overhaulers, that sort of that lower tier, that probably for them, they can probably don't see the added value of having an SMS. And I think those are going to be the ones that are going to be certainly more challenged in terms of what do I do in terms of this SMS? To have something in place, but also in terms of what's going to keep the regulator happy from that perspective.
Sure. So the people who have been proactive are ahead of the game, really.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of organisations, even third-party maintenance organisations, certainly in the aircraft maintenance world, that have been doing some really good stuff in terms of SMS implementation, just ahead of the regulations.
Sure. So I have 12 questions for you that have been sent in, but people who are listening, if some question suddenly occurs to you that you'd really like answered, if you post it in the chat, if time allows, then we'll try and get to that as well. So I've put these in a sequence that I think makes sense insofar that it starts general and gets more specific. Okay, so first question was, what are the main challenges for implementing SMS in a Part 145?
I guess I'll start with a big one, which is resources. In terms of financial, in terms of how much is this going to cost me and how much do I need to put into this? But probably one of the key challenges in terms of resources is around the role of the safety manager. Am I an organization that should be looking at a full-time safety manager? Is it going to be something that's a part-time safety manager? Can I combine it with the quality / compliance monitoring manager? Because again, historically, we've been using the term quality manager. Now we're shifting to a compliance monitoring manager. Again, can that be combined to make better use of the resources? So I think that's certainly a challenge from a Part 145 perspective. I think another one is around a lot of the guidance, a lot of the training out there tends to be very focused around the operator. You know, even when you look at the document 9859, the ICAO SMM, it will talk about crosswinds and stuff that are more related to an airline. So there's less guidance and less training that is more focused on, well, how do I do this in a maintenance organization? Because it is going to be a slightly different perspective because you're looking at it slightly differently. And that sort of goes on. I don't think there's really good guidance, especially for component overhaulers, sort of that level of 145 organization that may be more challenging than it is for example, for an aircraft maintenance organization. I think the other one is, again, it goes back to saying, is how do I implement an SMS that is suitable for my organization? So it's going to be fit for purpose for me, but also meet the regulatory requirements. And I think that's going to be the challenge in terms of how do I make this work for me, but in a way that is still showing I can still demonstrate that compliance to the regulator. And I think that's going to be another challenging area, because it is, you know, the types of hazards and risks, the impact on, you know, there's very limited hazards that certainly a component overhaul organization can generate that's going to cause a catastrophic event. So again, that makes it harder in terms of how am I going to use the typical risk matrices to implement that in my maintenance organization. Lastly, I'll say the other challenge is really around the regulator, and does the regulator have a good understanding of the practical implementation of SMS? Because again, I think if the regulator is looking at it from a purely compliance black and white perspective, then that's going to end up focusing on the SMS manual and less about how are you managing safety on a day-to-day basis. So I think there's still that challenge in terms of the how do we make sure that the regulator is fully conversant and knows what they're looking for in terms of that practical implication of SMS, and the recognition that it is subjective in terms of how different organizations might sort of still implement an SMS. They're going to be looking different, but they're still delivering the intent of being able to manage safety.
For sure. So what kind of hazards would you typically expect to see on a maintenance organisation's hazard list?
So one of the challenges is that a lot of the hazards you might see, I would say, are already sort of captured through existing regulations, because obviously things like fatigue, things like noise, temperature, poor procedures, they're all hazards, but they're all also things that actually the Part 145 regulations have already got things in place for that. But I think things like commercial and time pressure, I think unrecorded maintenance, certainly that sort of seems to be one. Language proficiency, and I think it's, we have got lots of organizations where, English isn't the first language, and therefore being able to interpret maintenance instructions. And, I don't think the aircraft manufacturers always write things in good, plain English. I don't think the operators and the continuing weathers management organizations always provide instructions in clear, plain language. And that in itself can cause some of those misinterpretations. It's almost like I could list the dirty dozen. I could list, there are so many of those. A lot of them are related to human factors, but there are just so many of them that it's like, where do you start and where do you stop? Bogus parts or unapproved parts, again, seems to be an issue that's rearing its head again. Availability of parts. So I know that the supply chain of getting some parts is becoming more of a challenge. Again, what does that put in terms of pressure on the company and the organization to deal where we've got the unavailability of parts? So any more staff competence?
Well, I was thinking that just because something is also covered by another part of the regulation doesn't mean it can't be an issue for your SMS.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could still put that on your hazard list.
Because I think for me, one of the important things is we want the organization to focus on what is the more significant of those hazards. So again, if fatigue is one of their top risks, yes, there may be there is a regulation there, but it's I think it's quite a weak regulation in terms of controlling fatigue. Therefore, that's an area where I think there is a need to use your SMS as a means of controlling that fatigue risk, because I think the regulations don't go far enough, like they do in certainly in terms of the flight ops area, in terms of flight crew flight time limitations and the fatigue risk management system. So again, they're there in the ops world, but they don't seem to be. There's nothing like that level within the maintenance environment. And I think just another area I think we have to be conscious of, and I think we focused on mental well-being of flight crew, and I think we've got to recognise it's not just flight crew.
Sure.
Increasing workload, the shift work involved for a lot of maintenance engineers, those pressures being brought to bear. I think we have to sort of recognise that issue of the mental well-being of our staff and the impact that can have on increasing maintenance errors is just as important in the maintenance environment.
Well, yeah, sure. And we hear a lot less about it, don't we, in the maintenance environment? But
yeah, because it probably gets hidden, and it's hidden within the organization. Whereas when it happens in the piloting world, we get this. It tends to be more visible in terms of either because of the events that we've seen. So again, I think from that sort of thing, it's probably managed locally and doesn't really get that visibility that perhaps in other areas.
oh, just noticed something in the chat, which I think it would be useful to do now because it's on topic. The issue with adding compliance matters to the hazard list can put you at odds with the limitations of Part 145. How do we square this issue?
I think it is one of these challenges where it's almost like we have to meet the requirements, so we have to comply with those requirements. So having something where the only thing in our hazard log is the mitigation is comply with the regulation, that seems to be something that what are we gaining from including that? I think it's really around, you know, going back to that issue of fatigue, where I think fatigue is not managed well through the regulation. Those are the kind of things that we want to try and focus on, and actually using it to prioritize what are perhaps the more significant risks for the organization.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this one's quite popular. Can you please share some practical examples of SPIs for maintenance organisations? How do you set SPIs and how do you keep monitoring them?
So one of the things I would start with is making sure we've identified some safety objectives for the organisation. So what we tend to do is we jump in and think, well, what can we measure? Rather than necessarily thinking about what is it that we want to try and what are our priorities as an organization? So perhaps we should be starting with identifying, and I would say 3 to 5 safety objectives for the organization. We don't need any more than that. Any more than that, you're diluting those messages. And then trying to look at, from those safety objectives, what might we want to measure that's going to help us see how well are we doing in terms of meeting those safety objectives. So again, obviously, there's going to be, you're likely to have a safety objective related to reporting of some sort in terms of increasing the amount of voluntary reports. So again, we might want to measure number of voluntary reports. And again, we need to think about number of voluntary reports per. Now, do we do flying hours? Probably not appropriate in a maintenance organization. So we might want to do it either per the number of employees. We might want to do it per number of maintenance hours that we've delivered. So again, we've got to think about what is an appropriate rate. We might want to go more specific and go and drill down, because just number of reports may be misleading because we're just getting the wrong reports, or the quality of those reports isn't great. So again, some organizations, some more mature organizations might be measuring the number of third age reports. So these are the reports where people in the organization are reporting my errors, my mistakes, and just trying to separate those out from all of the reports and say, you know, we want to see an increase in those third age reporting might be something to consider. But again, we can look at things like, if we're concerned about fatigue, we might want to be looking at overtime rates. How many times do we go beyond our normal working hours? I know in UK CAA published CAP 716, which was human factors guidance for maintenance organizations. That's got a very good section around controlling of fatigue and the amount of breaks, how frequently you should have breaks, and how many hours you should work per day, per week. So again, you could use that as how many times have we gone over that recommendations in CAP 716. We can look at planned hours versus actual hours that we deliver. We can look at number of maintenance errors. Again, try to look at some of those things where we start to look at things like maintenance errors. It's useful as an SPI only in as much that we're just monitoring it. And again, this is where we've got to be very careful about targets. You know, even for things like reporting levels, putting a target on things like reporting levels can create the wrong behaviors. So again, we've got to be very, very careful around that. Again, so it goes back to looking at what are our safety objectives? What can we measure to help us in terms of how well are we achieving those safety objectives? Number of defects on the first flight or the first week of flights after the aircraft leaves our facility. Repetitive defects, repetitive findings, lots of, you know, there's plenty of different things that we can use in terms of SPIs. So again, it's really just sort of trying to link them to those safety objectives. For a small organization, again, it might just be reporting levels, and just having a single SPI saying about, we're going to monitor the number of reports that we get. We're not going to put a target on there, we're just going to monitor it. And that might help us in terms of seeing how well we're doing from a reporting perspective. And that might be all that you can have. We can get into things like attendance at meetings. So what percentage of the nominated persons actually attended our safety meetings? How many safety meetings did we actually achieve in terms of planned versus actual? Because I know with some of those safety meetings, they sort of, we plan to do them quarterly, but when it comes to we're due one and it gets sort of delayed slightly, and then it gets delayed slightly. So again, those are sort of some of the things that are more focusing on how effective is our SMS? How long does it take from a time to close safety reports? So there are things that perhaps we can look at from that perspective, both from an SMS perspective or from the maintenance activity perspective. But it is an area that most organizations struggle with, and often they're driven by just looking at what's easy to measure or what do other people measure, and they just think, okay, let's just measure that because we know that we will try and do that. I think the other thing is, you've got to look at what data you have. What actually have you got good data and reliable data to turn into an SPI? You know, for small organizations, you're going to have very limited data. So again, trying to come up with 5-10 SPIs when you're a very small maintenance organization, you're probably going to be measuring a lot of stuff that's going to be 0, 0, 0, 0. And that's the idea of an SPI, is to help indicate how well you're doing. So if you're measuring 0, 0, 0, 0, if you do get an event, you know about it. You don't need an SPI to tell you all of a sudden you've had a significant event. But it's certainly a challenge, especially for the smaller organizations.
Right. So if we're getting a row of zeros, we probably need to go down a level to something that does actually happen. If there is something below that level, we talk about precursor events, leading and lagging indicators, we can try and come up with something. But again, this is, for me, we sometimes end up thinking that we've got to end up with 10, 20 SPIs, when in our organization, actually 2 or 3 might be all we can come up with, but they're
2 or 3 SPIs that we can monitor. They are helpful for us, and therefore those are the ones we're gonna go for. And that links back to being cautious of regulators not suddenly saying, well, you need 10, you need 15, or anything like that. For some organizations, it's less is more.
Right. So the next one was, what do you see as the major blockers to effective introduction of SMS, and why is it so difficult for some organizations to understand?
I'll always start with the people at the top of the organization. If the account manager has not bought into it, then you're always going to be on an uphill struggle. So again, that's the first blocker. I'd even go as far as to say the nominated persons, the other senior managers under the account manager, if they've not bought into it, again, they can also be blockers, because it's almost like safety is done by the safety office or the safety manager. One of my key messages is that when we talk about safety, safety is the responsibility of those nominated persons and the account manager. Safety manager is responsible for the SMS. So again, we needed to make sure that we delineate that. I think it goes back to some of the things we started with in terms of misunderstanding what SMS is, and therefore I think there's been a lot of, certainly when you look back to the early days of 9859 and the ICAO guidance, it was very academic. And again, you can be frightened away by it because it looks too difficult. I've always been trying to get things to, keep it simple. And you can simplify a lot of these processes. In a 145, and again, I'll go back to, in a 145, you've already been doing a lot of the good SMS stuff through the HF requirements. So it's not like we're implementing an SMS from scratch. When you look at some of those hazards, a lot of them are managed through the HF requirements.
No.
So again, we need to recognize that. And that it's not as difficult as organizations might think. It also means that sometimes we see organizations that they overbuild their SMS. So they build it to something that is more complex than they need. I'll sort of go as far as to say sometimes they buy expensive software that probably they don't necessarily need, and they can get away without it. And I dare say, as a consultant, there are expensive consultants out there who can sometimes be more focused on generating the business than actually giving the organization what they need to make sure it's fit for purpose for them. So again, I think those are some of the blockers that sort of jump to mind immediately.
Okay. Just having a look at some of the chat things. So someone said the next edition of Annex 19 excludes targets. Would it be an idea to have SPI per level? The accountable manager should have other SPI, that section manager as an example. And if we break down the elements of SMS, the Part 145 regulations have combined such that since 2006, in essence, we are 18 years on the SMS journey. We just haven't called it that. Do you think the focus is too much on the mechanics of SMS versus the cultural aspects, and how such it has been overseen by regulators? If that doesn't change, can we really manage safety effectively? Well, there's a few things there. Would you comment on any of those?
Oh, yeah. Where do I start? Yes, targets are being, there's less emphasis on targets in the next edition of Annex 19. So I think that's an indication of recognizing that. And I agree where we are. As I said, we're not starting from scratch with SMS. A lot of the HF requirements, I think the maintenance organization has been a good place from safety and management perspective. So I think we do need to recognize that. And I do think we need to to recognise the important role that safety culture plays. And it goes back to that important role that the accountable manager has. If the council manager hasn't bought into it, if the senior management team hasn't bought into it, then you're going to struggle to get the right organizational culture. And if you're going to struggle to get that right organizational culture, it's really not going to end up delivering what the organization needs in terms of safety management. Again, going back to the thing about SPIs, we just got to be careful that we don't just start measuring stuff for the sake of measuring stuff. I've seen it in CAAs in states. I've seen it in some organizations where they're measuring 50 or 60 SPIs, and you're just diluting what you're trying to see. And actually, we need to make sure that we keep focused on what's important, again, linked back to our safety objectives, and what is actually measurable. And it might be that, you know, anything, when you get more than 10 SPIs, I think you're starting to get to the point for a maintenance organization where you might be just spending a lot of resource, safety managers' time, producing these reports that perhaps aren't necessarily going to add any value or useful to the decision makers, which is what they should be.
Okay, thank you. So the next one is about how does my AMO SMS interface with that of the operator's SMS?
So again, it's an interesting one in terms of that relationship. I think for me, one of the things about SMS for me is we need to recognize that we can't keep looking at our bit of the system in isolation from the rest of the system. And therefore, there has to be a strong interface and a strong relationship between the operator and the maintenance organization. And that's probably the main interface is around information sharing, you know, sharing data, sharing information, developing greater partnerships between the operator and the maintenance organization. And I think that's, to me, is it becomes where we start to look at what is the best risk mitigation, you know, working with the operator, working with the maintenance organization to say what is going to be the best solution so that we can come up with a solution that works for the maintenance organization and works for the operator as well. And again, that collaboration needs to be there for investigations under the expectation that the operator should be applying a just culture, not to its own people, but to the maintenance organization. Yeah. And again, we need to make sure that interface and that agreement is clear. And yes, you want the maintenance organization to be reporting to the operator. So a lot of it is supporting the operator. But at the same time, there has to be this issue where we see examples where the operator expects the MRO to do miracles in terms of turning around an aircraft in half the time it would normally need to do the aircraft turnaround, and then wonder why there then becomes issues. Putting pressure on the maintenance organization on a ever-changing work pack. Oh, can you just do this? Oh, can you do this? And again, recognizing that can then have a knock-on effect on the maintenance organization. There may have completely different risk matrices, and that's okay. Because it's more important, the maintenance organization should be focusing on the risk methodology that works for the maintenance organization. And there isn't this sort of thing where everybody has to have the same risk matrix. It's more around the maintenance organization can provide the operator with what are the key risks, that sort of thing, but you don't necessarily need to have an aligned risk matrix. And again, a lot of maintenance organizations deal with multiple operators. So again, it's around the maintenance organization recognizing it has to manage its own hazards and risks from its own perspective.
That's an interesting. I like the thing about the safety culture being applied to their dealings with the maintenance organisation, which I think is not perhaps something that's always very obvious in that. Actually, just one question from me related to this, which is, do you think that sometimes the safety priorities of the operator and the safety priorities of the maintenance organisation may be different? For example, it may not be a big deal for airworthiness whether TCAS is operational or whether, whether it's serviceable or how good the radio is or whatever. But from the operational point of view, it is a big deal. Do you think there's a bit of a mismatch there sometimes?
I think for me it falls in the operator. I see the operator doesn't always take on its own responsibilities. From a maintenance organisation perspective, I have a minimum equipment list. If it says I can release the aircraft without TCAS, that's not my decision. It's the operator that needs to make that risk decision to say, is it safe operating an aircraft in the London TMA without TCAS? And I would say if you're an operator, that's quite a high risk in terms of the congestion around London. So those are the decisions that perhaps need to be made by the operator. But I guess what I do sometimes see, and I've seen it where the maintenance control people within the operator or the camo are putting a lot of pressure on the maintenance engineer to release the aircraft when there perhaps might be questionable interpretations of the MEL. I've seen that happen before, or putting pressure on the engineer just to accept something without any, and it's the engineer who's going to be signing the release. And the person sitting in the maintenance control says nothing to do with me. I gave them advice. But that advice is almost seen as you will do this, or we'll take our business elsewhere.
Just something that's come in the chat. We seem to be missing an important entity in this relationship, which is the camo. In a lot of occasions, the AMO does not directly interface with the operator. Yeah,
and I think when we talk about the operator, I'm including the camo within that relationship. So yeah, when I talk about operator, I'm as much talking about the camo as I am the operator itself. But yeah, I recognise that. Again, we're still outside of the UK. There's still many states that don't have the role of the camo. It sits within the operator as well. And I can see Neil's comment around the Air Astana event. For those who don't know this was an Air Astana Embraer that was being maintained at an MRO, where the MRO managed to cross-connect the aileron control cables. It was only discovered once the flight crew actually rotated, and then they were flying an aircraft where when you turn left, the aircraft turns right. Again, lots of breakdown in terms of the relationship between the operator were treating the maintenance organisation almost as you do your job and we'll just get the delivered aircraft, without necessarily providing the right level of engagement with the maintenance organisation.
Okay, interesting. Okay. What is the criteria for an effective SMS implementation to a small AMO, which I think is basically looking at, SMS for small organisations?
I think for any organisation, the smaller that you are, the harder it is to implement an SMS that's fit for purpose. I would recommend that the Safety Management International Collaboration Group, SMICG, produced a very good document called Guidance for Small Organisations. That includes lots of templates, things like management change process, a simple safety report. That's probably, for me, the best guidance I would recommend for a small organisation the challenge will be, how do you demonstrate to your regulator that what you've got in place meets the intent of those requirements and it's fit for purpose for you? And it's, to me, it's that obligation, not the obligation, but I think it's about how the maintenance organization is able to justify and demonstrate this works for us. It's suitable for our organization to do this. But again, it is a challenge, especially when, again, I'll go back to, if you're a small organization and you're a small organization dealing with component overhaul, trying to identify hazards that might have an impact on aviation safety can be quite challenging. So even then, it's almost like, what's in it for me? And I think for some of those small organizations, probably there are no benefits, and it will be more of a burden on them because they're too remote from the aircraft accident to really be able to put in something that isn't just going to be paper safe and just will do something that hopefully will keep the regulator happy, but probably not going to get much out of it.
Okay, just looking over at the
Yes,
I put a link into the SMICG products, which is good. Yeah, I would certainly endorse those because they're very good quality, but they're also nice and simple and direct. They're not a difficult read.
And we try to make it an easy read, so the people that in so small organizations are able to read it.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is, we're not going to. I think if the regulations or the regulator expects them to have a full-time safety manager, that's just not possible. I think it's around, do we look at combining roles? What would be the best? Can we have a part-time safety manager? And I would say probably it's all you need is a part-time safety manager if you're that very small organization. And again, we need to make sure that the regulators are looking at that from a what is going to be realistic for some of those smaller organizations.
Sure. Okay. Another endorsement there I see in the chat. That's good. Okay, this question's a little bit longer, but I'm going to read it all because it's the intent of the person who sent it in. In the context of continuous airworthiness management, it's been observed that there seems to be a lack of uniformity in controlling and managing repetitive defects in accordance with Part M and CAMO guidelines. The absence of a specified period for addressing these issues presents a significant challenge for the industry. Considering your expertise in safety management systems, I'm keen to understand your perspective on what might constitute the best method for managing repetitive defects within the framework of an SMS.
I think first of all is recognizing that repetitive defects are an indication that perhaps what we're doing in terms of root cause analysis, investigations, when we have had defects, maybe we're not getting to the root cause and therefore maybe we're not fixing the problem. So I would say, first of all, and again, safety investigations probably haven't been captured well enough in terms of the SMS requirements. For me, it's part of hazard identification. And if we're doing good safety investigations, and that safety investigation can be, we're not just talking about safety investigation when we've had a major accident or incident, but we can do that when we've had from a safety report, when we've had defects, we can look at that defect and try and understand, why did it happen? Why was it missed? And start to look at whether there's things that we can do to make sure that we are trying something different next time, rather than just doing the same thing that we did last time. trying to understand it. Because again, sometimes those repetitive defects might be to do with a design issue, might be completely outside of our control of the organization. So again, it's a hard one, and I would say it's more, for me, that's just more part of the regulations are there to try and address that. But it is worth using as an SPI, number of repetitive defects, to monitor it, and then trying to monitor how well are we investigating and actually preventing them from being repetitive defects.
Okay. Thank you. How would you say that commercial pressure impacts running an SMS, and how can SMS survive effectively under cost-cutting environment?
Yes. We all recognise commercial pressure, the pressure to release the aircraft if you've got 200-300 passengers on board an aircraft, the pressure to get the aircraft out of the hangar, on-time performance. You know, these are the pressures that we're under all the time, and you know, everybody's just gone through the impact of the coronavirus. You know, a lot of organizations have had challenges in terms of hemorrhaging money, and we're just trying to get back into that sort of situation of recovery. I would say one of the things, if we do SMS well, SMS can actually improve the bottom line, because although we're trying to use it to manage safety risks, when things go wrong, they cost us money. So again, doing it well, we might actually save money in the long run. So again, there's always this argument that to say the more effective our SMS, the more we see that return on that investment. But that is quite a challenge, especially when you know, some of the smaller organizations might struggle in that, in terms of, you know, what's in it for them, but certainly from a larger organization. But I think, yeah, we just recognize that commercial pressure exists. It's not going to go away, and it's always something that I think it's always something that we've got to make sure both the organization and our staff understand the importance of being able to not be challenged all the time by that commercial pressure. And sometimes we've got to be able to stand up and say, no, I can't release it. No, it's not safe. Tough, can be quite tough on individuals and organizations to be able to do that. But I think that's what we've got to be able to make sure that our people feel empowered to be able to do that.
And that would be one of the occasions where the senior management support is very important as well. Just have something in the chat. Says, we have just completed a 1-year study at IASA CAG about repetitive defects. 5 large operators and a large OEM were involved. The outcome will be fed to the next version of the EPAS. That's interesting. And some more useful links that people have posted. One of the other questions that came in, probably an extreme example of the commercial pressure: how can the aviation industry manage change as a Part 145 safety during insolvency?
I mean, the only thing I'd say here is actually the management of change process is probably a good mechanism for dealing with a challenging situation like insolvency, because it ensures that when you're dealing with that kind of situation, you're considering all of both the safety and the business impacts of that change. Now, that management change process should be focusing on what is the safety impact of going through this challenging situation. But at the same time, I've seen a lot of good management change processes that also recognize that there might be administrative, business type issues that need to be addressed or actioned as part of that management of change. So I would say the management change process, if you use it properly, is there to help you to deal with that situation. And again, SMICG, Guidance for Small Organisations, got a very good template for management change. It's for small organisations, but I'd also say it's probably quite a useful one for any size organisation. It actually was derived from one of the UK's largest operators, and we took their template and we just simplified it, but it's very, very similar. So, so again, you don't have to be a small organisation to use that template.
Okay, thank you. And a perennial one here: how should SMS engage with an environment of blame and punishment culture?
It shouldn't engage with an environment of blame and punishment culture, because it should be trying to shift to a just culture. Again, recognizing that it's easy to say we've got a just culture. It's easy to find the right words to say we have a just culture, but it's all about perception. It's about what people believe. And I think that's where the challenges sit. We've got a regulation across the UK and the EU that mandates just culture within all of our industry, including the maintenance organisations. But we know even with that regulation in place, there's still some blame. And again, conscious of what we mean by punishment. Punishment can just be, you get a letter on your file, I feel like I'm being punished. So we've got to be careful. It's not just about, okay, we didn't sack the person, but even if anything that makes me feel negative is going to feel like I'm being punished. So again, we've got to recognize what we mean by that sort of that punishment. But again, I think, you know, culture is one of those things. We know that culture doesn't change overnight. It takes years and years to build and mature. It can be destroyed just like that by one poor management decision or one overreaction. But we're on a journey, and that just culture journey is, we're not, you know, I'm not going to put my hand on my heart and say, you know, we've sorted out just culture, because I know we haven't. And I think we're seeing good evidence of it in some organizations, and I still come across organizations where it feels like it's they've got the right words, but it's not there inside the organization. And again, how much of that links back to nominated persons, accountable managers? How many of those have actually been trained on the application of just culture and what it means and the impact they have and influence they have on the safety culture? If we haven't addressed it at the management level, it's never going to be embedded at a workforce level. So again, we've got to make sure that the focus is on the management side of just culture rather than the workforce side of just culture.
And as you say, it's not always immediate, and it's not always an obvious punishment. So people, you know, it can be a bit more subtle than that. Yeah, it's a very interesting one. Do you think it's getting better? Generally?
You mean just culture? Yeah, I think it is. I've even seen examples of it improving in other countries outside of the EU. So, but it's still a challenge, and I think it's, you know, for me, we've got to recognise that it's going to be a battle, and I think as soon as we get to the point where we know that we all have a good and healthy, just and safety culture, we're probably going to be wrong, because again, it's something that we can't let go of it, because, you know, it doesn't take much for it to suddenly change. You know, how some organizations treated their staff during the pandemic had a huge impact on organizational safety culture. When it's damaged, how do you then recover that trust? How do you recover that safety culture and that just culture when it has been damaged? And I don't have the answer to that, because I just think it's such a hard thing to rebuild. So yeah,
very tough once you've lost trust. Yeah.
yeah.
Someone's put in the chat, just culture has become a process and a flow chart as opposed to a set of beliefs, which is an interesting one. And would it be an idea to strengthen best culture by organising meetings between the operators, responsible persons and the oversight authority staff to get a common understanding of the subject?
I think we do need to talk. The more we talk about, maybe it's not just about talking. We've got to have healthy discussions between the regulator and the regulated. But I think also in terms of getting getting industry together, where you get the operator, the camo, the maintenance organization, perhaps the design and manufacturing organizations together in a room, just talking about some of these things, talking about safety culture, talking about how can we better share information, that we're all on this journey. We're all in this in terms of wanting to improve safety. And therefore, how do we do this together? How do we make the most of it as an industry, rather than just saying, well, we're just going to look after our bit of the system? And I think Heli Offshore is a good example where they've managed to bring all of the key players of the rotary industry together and working on how do we improve offshore helicopter safety together. And I think for me, how do we then transfer that kind of approach to the fixed wing world, to other parts of the community? That would be quite I think that'd be a huge win if we can achieve that.
Yeah, I think you're right. As you know, I'm a big fan of the benefits that come from actually getting people from different disciplines together, because it's always the interfaces where the misunderstandings happen, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. We expect a great deal of our frontline staff in civil aviation. Is SMS adding to their burden, or is it a relief?
I'd like to think that if the organisation is implementing an effective SMS, the frontline staff are going to benefit from it. They'll benefit from, if they recognise that the organisation is trying to do its best to give us a safer environment to work in, then I'm more able to do my job properly, and therefore the output is likely to be a better working environment and a safer working environment. And I think, for me, it sort of encourages, if it's working well, it encourages people to share their issues, their concerns, their problems, the stuff they're seeing in front of them, and hopefully by reporting it, it will get fixed, rather than it either goes into the black hole of the safety office and nothing ever changes. So again, that's one concern. Or how many times do we have a known issue where we all know it's a problem? We talk about it amongst ourselves, but because we've not reported it, because we're scared of reporting it, it never gets fixed, and it becomes this workaround. It becomes that practical drift we talk about, because we found a better way of doing it, and we don't want to report it because they might suddenly stop us doing it.
No. Okay. We did have a question come in about what UK CA are planning to do. I think we can't realistically answer that, unfortunately. So apologies to the person who sent that question in. If we have any more questions from the floor, please type them into the chat now, or forever hold your peace. But just while anyone's thinking of that, the last question was, what 3 words would you use to describe SMS if you only had 3?
I don't think you could describe SMS in 3 words other than safety management system. But I would say it's more, if I'm allowed to say a sentence, it's more about something that allows an organization to identify and manage its safety risks to an acceptable level, or to as low as reasonably practical, if that might be the other way of capturing that. But yeah, it's all to do with that risk management, and to me, trying to do it as simply as possible. I think the important thing is that the organization owns it. I also recommend you use of color. Traffic lights, red, amber, green, you don't need any other colors than those three to help highlight what's important against what's under control. And again, just recognize that SMS safety culture, it's all about a journey, and these things are going to take time, but you're already on that. You're fairly well down that journey because of the history of human factors being implemented into Part 145. So again, to some extent, you've had that head start from maybe some of the other domains.
Okay, thank you. Let's just see if we've got any more in the... do we think the term SMS has become tainted already? Most of my engagements show a deep cynicism about SMS, sadly.
I think there is I don't think it's tainted. I think a lot of organizations have maybe lost their way on what SMS is and what it's supposed to deliver. I think, like all these sort of things, it's to what extent has the organization truly bought into it? Is it sincere? Is it genuine? I think there are organizations who get it, who want it, who seem to be doing really well. I think there are always going to be people and organizations who don't see the benefits of it, and I think that's always been one of my challenges is how to influence and how to convince people. If you get it right, there are some benefits, but yeah, I think there are certainly some challenges from that perspective.
Sure. And is the risk matrix still a useful tool?
I think it's the way that the risk matrix is being used is flawed. I think there's an over-reliance on the risk matrix. I still think there's some value in the risk matrix, and I know that the event risk classification methodology that's used for events and occurrences, I still think there's some value in those, but we shouldn't be basing our decisions solely on what the risk matrix, what the risk score is, but we should be using it to help us prioritize and help the decision makers, but not relying solely on it. And I think that's where I think I see some organizations, they'll come up with their score and it says, it's whatever the score is, and that's so we're okay or we're not okay. To me, it still has a place, but I think we just have to be cautious that we don't just rely on the risk score as the sole. It's subjective. That every risk assessment is subjective, and therefore use it to help you make a decision, but it's not a definitive risk score. So again, that's why I'd always sort of say, yeah,
it starts the conversation, not finishes the conversation.
It starts the conversation, and I always use an example where a CEO made a decision not to operate to a particular destination because although the risk assessment said it's okay, I'll say she actually made the decision. She could sense that there was an unease and said, look, we're not going there. So just because the risk assessment says it's okay doesn't necessarily mean it's okay. And that's where we need to still apply that judgment and that decision making based on our own understanding and our own knowledge.
Okay. So just going back to the chat, what else we got in here? So about the risk matrix, a good question. HSE don't use any examples, and they And do they support the management of safety risk to ALART? I mean, yeah, they're good guidance, I think, is what we came to, wasn't it? Thank you for sharing your expertise, Simon. Keep up the great work. The journey is not always easy, but getting to the destination will eventually send the message that it will all be worthwhile in the end. I've seen so many organisations struggle to get it, but once the light bulb comes on, the route to destination get a higher priority and easier to achieve. Must go now, but thank you. That's nice. John Adams from UCL talks about cutting the crap, compulsive risk assessment, psychosis. Sometimes the regulator's approach and expectation to the industry aligns with this. What should we pay attention to in order to provide effective training to employees who have no idea what SMS is? It's an interesting one.
I'm just going to go back to one thing about the risk matrix.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things to recognise is not everything can be risk assessed. So it's important that there are some risks. If you think about likelihood and severity of something, mostly human factor stuff like fatigue, how do you work out the severity? Because it depends on what the person is doing at the time. And that's where I think we should be able to say, for some risks, the risk matrix doesn't work, but we should still be able to, as an organisation or as a management team at a safety action group meeting, say, we consider this to be a high risk, even though we've got we can't score it, but we know it's a high risk and therefore we're going to manage it. So that I wanted to capture that.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of getting SMS for people who don't understand it, I think we've got to be very careful. There are simple ways of trying to get people to understand SMS, and it's not in document 9859. It's as simple as when you're driving your car on a motorway, do you drive above the speed limit? Do you drive under the speed limit? What happens when it starts to rain? When it starts to visibility goes, you change your speed. Some people will change your speed based on the conditions. That's risk management. That's how we want to try and simplify SMS so that those people who might struggle with the content of it, just give them some key principles at risk management. And then we can start to look. They don't need to know about the 12 components of an SMS. That's not, for me, it's about how do I understand what risk management is about? How do I contribute to the SMS? If I see something, I report it. What happens when it gets reported? What is the expected behaviours of me in terms of if I find that I'm stuck with a procedure that doesn't make sense, what do I do? So again, I think we need to make sure that we don't again create complex understanding of SMS to people who don't need that complex understanding, and that sort of almost creates this thing where SMS is something for the scientists or the professionals or the academics, and it's not. So again, I think there's some stuff we need to do in terms of always keeping that keeping the message about SMS as simple as possible.
And I suppose to continue with your driving analogy, just to, promoting reporting, if you don't report debris on the motorway, no one's going to come and clear it up, are they? So
correct, yeah.
Yeah. So okay. Is the S76 accident, the Kobe Bryant, was risk assessed to the floor, yet the accident was preventable by effective compliance, flight planning, etc. Is a method of managing risk, isn't it?
And again, it goes back to, we still get people making risk decisions that perhaps were incorrect. I'll use the Vauxhall Bridge accident for the UK. Again, related to helicopter operations. There seems to be a lot of those going on. I think there's been quite a lot of helicopter accidents in recent months where, we seem to be flying helicopters into poor conditions and they're known conditions, yet we still continue to fly, whether it's under pressure of the passengers. Again, it might be pressure from the media outlet who wants to get the best pictures. So again, always recognizing those pressures.
Sure. What are your thoughts on how to deal with the recurring unlatched engine cowl issue from an SMS perspective in light of the most recent incident with Southwest Airlines?
It hasn't gone away, has it? Again, we don't know the facts about it yet. We still seem to be having these type of occurrences. You know, how much of it is related to design? How much of it is we're putting too much pressure on the individual mechanic or engineer? They're being distracted, they're fatigued. So I think it'll be interesting to understand a little bit more about it, but that problem of cowlings not being secured and latched isn't gone away yet. And I don't know from an SMS perspective, other than to say, we've got to be, you know, certainly from an engineer's perspective, there's some stuff we can do to try and manage it. But again, what about the flight crew? Where does the flight crew and the walk around checks, the final walk around checks, was the one with Southwest, was the opening and closing of the cowling, was it recorded? Again, unrecorded maintenance, was that an issue again from this event? So again, without jumping to conclusions, there's lots we can do from an SMS perspective, but both from a maintenance organisation and from an operator side of things.
Okay, thank you. Move beyond the focus on the technicians and understand the broader factors, including the design, make it ALARP. And, you know, subject close to my heart. Yeah, sometimes the design can help you and not a lot or not.
Yeah, and yes, it's always that sort of thing where we can't get the design to meet the 10 to the -9, we get a human to mind the gap for us, and then wonder why things don't work, because, you know, we've forgotten that the humans are not 100% reliable. We put pressure on them. We expect them to work in all kinds of weather conditions. They're fatigued, overworked, and so therefore every now and again something's going to go wrong. And the idea is, from an SMS perspective, and even from a Part 145 perspective, we try and put in place systems to try and capture those things from an error actually resulting in something bad happening. But even our defenses don't always work as intended. How many duplicate inspections are not done in the way that they should be done? Independent inspections. I'm still talking in old money, but I've seen it. I've seen it where the duplicate inspection is a sign-off. It's not the safety net it should be.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, we haven't got any more questions coming in. I think we've exhausted everyone. So just remains to say thank you to everyone for joining us, and particularly Simon, thank you very, very much for your time to talk about these questions. It's never easy just taking questions ad hoc, but I think we'd all agree done a great job of that. So thank you very much for sharing with us, and thank you to everyone.
No problem.
Thanks coming up.
Thank you very much, Simon. Yes.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. Challenging as it is.
It's been a good event.
And everyone, we will be sending around a request for some feedback and your ideas for any future events. You know, what would you like to see a future events focus on? So
yeah, very much so. I endorse that. I mean, if we can hold similar events on similar topics that help people in a practical way, let's go and do it. Thank you, everybody.
okay.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Simon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a good remainder of the
Bye,
day.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
It was very useful and interesting.